Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome back to this week's lesson video. And this week I had a really cool topic to kind of think about, in that I was working with a couple of students and it reminded me of a few questions I get quite regularly whenever I have students come in, and it's usually something to do with either comping or chord melody. And it's like, how can I make my comping more interesting? How can I make my chord melody more interesting? Or more exciting or more vibrant? I feel like I'm falling into the same patterns, and sometimes these students come in having shed voice leading and working on all this, but it doesn't seem to translate quite well, so I thought I'd tackle that today. As always, if you enjoy the content, please do like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton for this channel, helps more people see it, and it inspires me to keep creating. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of the lesson. And principally, I was actually talking about this with a student today when it kind of came up organically, and I figured, that's interesting, in that most of the issues that tend to arise from this can usually be stemmed from students focusing a lot on the voicings themselves. For example, I did an intro on My One and Only Love, and sure, it's a collection of voicings, it's a collection of ideas that I've worked on, but I don't really think of them as just standalone voicings. It doesn't seem to lend itself to creating a piece of music. After all, it's basically the same equivalent of if someone wants to learn how to play over changes. A scale is not going to be the prescribed fix, so to speak, to be able to fix that problem. A person has to go through understanding language. So I thought I'd do this video and talking about developing a harmonic vocabulary. Now, a harmonic vocabulary doesn't stop at just chords or just single voicings. You know, sure, I can play all of these voicings and they work together, but how am I able to improvise an intro, for example, like My One and Only Love, or how am I able to just create an improvised spontaneous piece that comes to the greater whole of understanding collections of data, or rather groups, and I'm going to call these rather affectionately movements. Movements in and of themselves are kind of what give you your freedom to navigate and your freedom to play. It's kind of like playing with a phrase, as if I were to say, hey, how are you, in English, or, you know, the equivalent in any other language. It's similar to having that. For example, understanding this little 5-1 movement, right? Just a basic spread triad movement already can open up a myriad of doors. So, for example, if I were to use My One and Only Love and use this intro as a building block, this also can be an inspiration for how you can get vocabulary from tunes and from pieces that you learn. I use kind of anything I learn as a learning opportunity and going, okay, that's a cool little motion. You can take the bass motion of that tune, right? And then start working with that. So let's say I've taken this little movement, and there specifically what I'm doing is taking 1, then walking down to the 7, 6 minor, walking down to, 1 in second inversion, and it would resolve here, which would then resolve, which would be D over F sharp, which would then go to G7 over F, or G over F. But let's just take this first aspect. Now, what if I were to transpose that to something, or move that to something totally different, a different context? Different context entirely. Similar idea. What if I were to take that idea and move it somewhere else? Let's try avoid the minor cliche this time around. So let's say something also major. Like this. Improvised using this piece of language or a movement that I've gained from learning a piece of music. So now, how does this translate even further? Well, let's take other little movements I do. One I really love to do that's actually very pianistically inspired is taking a 1 major chord, then hitting sharp 5 and then resolving to 6 to get me that kind of C6 sound. You'll hear Barry Harris use this a lot, that kind of thing. It works especially well on 1 major and 4 major, and just using it as a passing phrase. It's a really cool movement. So then I'll use that whenever I'm improvising. And then I'll glean different movements from that. How about another one? That's one I love to use. It's a kind of a minor major 7 inspired idea. So I've got A, B flat, F sharp, and G. Then that moves up to C and A. It's based around a whole dyad idea. And then I just resolve it to E flat. So there are a handful of movements. Actually, here's another one I like to use. It's a bit of a stretch, but I love that contrapuntal nature of the movement. Now, why am I showing you all of these? Let's say I were to improvise using these movements. So I'm going to use these little, not movement in this term of a greater piece, mind you. So I'm going to improvise with these. So I've got that descending bass line idea. I've got the kind of augmented sound. I've got this minor major thing, and this kind of minor 2-5-1. Now what happens if I put it all together? I don't know, let's see. Let's go with that D major idea I was working with. So forth. I'm not aiming to play here, I'm aiming to use this as a teaching opportunity. So what am I doing? If I were to break this down, my improvisation is essentially a collection of movements or a collection of language that I've gained, and I'm kind of mixing and matching things as I see fit. So what's the point of developing this harmonic vocabulary? As I said, this is what's going to give you the freedom as a comper and as a chord melody player to be able to create good accompanying parts to whichever context you're in. Because one of the key secrets to being a very good comper or a great chord melody player is to understand melody in and of itself and understand the motion of voice leading. So, you can do all of these exercises, chord cycles, and studying voicings and plugging voicings into tunes, all of which I recommend to begin internalizing material. However, in the context of actual playing and actual freedom, you're going to have a little bit of a tough time working with this stuff. A little bit of a tough time working with this stuff if you haven't developed a sort of natural vocabulary. Little phrases that you can pick apart and start gleaning and using in any scenario. It's kind of the equivalent to if I were saying, okay, to learn how to play a 2-5-1, you have to understand a bit of 2-5 vocabulary. You have to understand how people use these ideas and piece them together. And then from there you can begin constructing your own. So for example, like maybe I would take this pianistic idea and then I would start pushing it around. Pushing it around a key, or what would happen if I didn't just take the sharp 5, I did this with maybe the higher notes. Or, right? Or what happens if I move the lower notes? That's a nice little movement there, actually. Right? That's a movement. And you see, it serves as a way for me to end up setting up modulations. So, moral of the story, today's lesson is actually going to be a really quick one. I want you, if you're listening to this video, or watching this video rather, and you're finding this interesting, take some of the movements I've gone through in here and start piecing them together. And what I would encourage you to do is work with your own. Try find these little ones. Like one I found a while ago that I use. Instead of just using this voicing as a standalone voicing, I've incorporated it into a piece of vocabulary. Or having those little walk-ups. Experiment. See what happens when you move a note about. See what happens when you connect two voicings. And if you find a movement you like, start treating it as a setup for a modulation. Or start using that piece of language in your playing. For example, if you see, much like someone would play this, with any of your new movements, you can do the same thing and plug them into a 2-5-1 or plug them into a scenario. So, I hope this lesson's helpful for you guys. I'm going to do an extended lesson and do a little bit more of a breakdown on Patreon. And as always, if you like and enjoy what I'm doing, please do like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. So, I will see you in the next video.